Thanks for listening in. This is Agriculture Today and our weekly segment on the cattle markets. And we've a raft of new numbers to consider influencing the trades in the form in particular of that USDA semi-annual cattle inventory report, which was posted last Wednesday. Joining us now is Deryl Peel, livestock economist at Oklahoma State University. Let's just pick right up on that cattle inventory report, Deryl. The national numbers seem to suggest that, yes, we may see more expansion, but at a rather restricted pace. Is that how you see it?
That's exactly how I see it. I guess, in terms of an overall reaction, I think this report was very consistent with our expectations. The all cattle and calves number was up just under 1%. That's actually a little less than I thought it might be, but 0.7%. The beef cow number was dead on with our expectations, up 1.6%. Beef replacement heifers were down 3.7%. Again, not a surprise. We can talk about, whether it was as down as much as maybe, at least I thought. It could be down even more than that, but nevertheless, the trend is exactly what we expected. Cattle on feed numbers in all feedlots for January 1 were up 7.2%, and the 2017 calf crop comes in at just exactly 2% over the previous year.
So you consider that in the aggregate, and once more, there may be a very slow pace of expansion, but there just doesn't seem to be anything to suggest rapid expansion in the herd.
Definitely not. I mean, we thought herd expansion would slow down in 17, and it did. 1.6% year-over-year increase compared to over 3%, or right about 3%, the two previous years. For 2018, again, the decrease in beef cow replacement number, adds further emphasis to the idea that we're slowing down even more. Some people I hear are suggesting that this means expansion's over, or even that maybe we go into a minor contraction. Mm-hmm. I think that's not as likely. If you look at that heifer replacement number as a percent of the overall cow herd, which is one of the ways I look at it in terms of kind of what we're trying to do behind the scenes, that percentage is still pretty big, even though it's coming down from record levels. It tells me that it's big enough that we do have room for a little bit more expansion in these numbers. It's not clear that we're going to or that we have to, but we certainly could see something, probably up to 1% more cows here in 2018 as it stands today.
Deryl, you say you've spotted, though, as you look to the regional breakdowns, the state breakdowns, and the numbers, an oddity or two here and there, including the numbers we see on the cow herd here in Kansas.
I find it a little interesting when you look at in this region and look at Kansas compared to north and south in Nebraska and Oklahoma. Kansas actually was down. All cattle and calves number was down 1.6%. Beef cows were down 4%. Beef replacement heifers were down 9.8%. So, that would suggest maybe a little more strongly that Kansas has done expanding at this point. In fact, already has pulled back a little bit, those cow herds. Nebraska had a very slight decrease, a 0.5% decrease in beef cow herd numbers. Their beef heifers were even with a year ago, so kind of a neutral number there. Oklahoma still growing. The beef cow herd number was just about exactly equal to the national number, up 1.7%. Beef replacement heifers were down here as well, 5.7%. So not vastly different signals, but I think a little bit of difference in direction with the idea that maybe Kansas has reached their limit a little bit quicker than the states on either side of it.
And then when you continue to look ahead into 2018 and you weave in what is shaping up to be a potentially dry year, that may skew the numbers as we go forward a bit, might it not?
It sure could. If you look at the drought situation right now, in fact, I went back and pulled the drought maps from this same time of the year into January 1st to February in 2011, and we're actually in much drier shape right now, a much bigger area of dry conditions. Now, the thing to keep in mind, of course, with the exception of wheat pasture, which is really kind of a past issue at this point, we've already pretty well written it off. But in terms of other forage, it doesn't really matter that we're dry the 1st of February or, in early February. But it sets up the idea that we watch it carefully, because if we're still dry, 60 to 90 days from now, then it's a big deal very quickly. And a wintertime drought or an early onset drought in the spring it can be a really devastating thing. So I think it's something we have to keep an eye on. We've got lots of time to fix it, but if we don't fix it and it continues to get worse, we could have a really big issue in a real big hurry a little bit later in the spring.
Well, shifting gears a bit here, but you do mention the lack of wheat pasture availability because the stands just haven't established. Well, it is once again dry in the central and southern plains. Are we seeing that ripple into the feeder cattle market currently at all, Deryl?
I think we are. We've seen a little bit of strength in these markets. We really carried some nice momentum out of 2017 into January and on through the month of January in general in cattle markets, in the feeder cattle markets. And actually you can see some of this in those annual inventory numbers that we were talking about. When you use the inventory categories and back out our estimated feeder supply, which is a calculated number, what we actually see on January 1 was a year-over-year decrease in feeder supplies, even though total cattle numbers still continue to expand. And the reason for that largely is the fact that we placed a lot of cattle, especially a lot of lightweight cattle, in late 2017 because they didn't have wheat pasture. And because of the dry conditions, they're already in the feedlot, meaning that there's actually a slight decrease in the number of feeder cattle out in the country. So we've got this sort of temporary boost or support, if you will, from a tighter supply of feeder cattle here that's going to help us in the early months here of 2018.
And in fact, as we look at the cash cattle trade last couple of weeks, once more 2 weeks ago, quite a bump up late in the week, $3 or $4. This week just passed, a little more modest movement there. But these feedlots appear quite current, for one thing.
I think feedlots are current. They're current. I think they're relatively full. They really did load up cattle, but they've stayed very current. Weights are coming down here in the early part of the year, and we see that seasonally. But we have had a lot of fairly cold weather that I think is probably helping that to happen. And so, in the fed cattle market, we've seen a little bit of tightness in near-term supplies, probably largely weather effects. But in these feeder cattle markets, again, feedlots continue to move cattle on a very timely basis. I think that there's still pretty good underlying demand for feeder cattle, and we have a little bit of short-term tightness in supplies that's really helping to support the market.
And that, what you just said, appears to be really resonating in the futures trade.
The futures markets for both live and feeder cattle have been very resilient. We know that they've been the recipient of a lot of interest on the part of some of the outside money, long positions in those markets. That always makes you a little nervous because you never know when they're going to change their minds and pull that money out and go somewhere else. But for the time being, those markets have been very resilient and certainly consistent with what we're seeing in these cash market fundamentals. And
to round out the picture here, how is boxed beef doing? Is it favorably showing as well?
Really has. If you look at boxed beef through January, it's held up very well. It's bouncing around a little bit. We're not seeing big changes. A day once in a while it'll drop pretty sharply, but then it's bounced back. And so, again, all in all, there are indications that we continue to move a significant volume of meat. Of course, we're dealing with large meat supplies, beef supplies, and other meats, and yet the boxed beef market continues remarkably robust at this point in time.
You consider all of that collectively then, Derrell, and it just seems like the cattle complex is in to put it this way, a comfort zone right now.
I think so. 2017, we've frequently described it as a pleasant surprise, and in spite of the supply pressures that were there in a big picture sense, demand obviously was the key to that, and I think we're continuing to enjoy that. We know beef production is going to be up for the year in 2018, so we continue to see some of those supply challenges, but demand has been very robust, and both domestic and on the international front, and as long as that continues, then we have a very good situation here. If there's a threat to the cattle industry, I say this in most of my meetings, I think the biggest chance of a shock of some kind comes not from internally. I think we are in pretty good shape inside the industry. It's probably from outside sources. Certainly there's still some uncertainty out there in terms of some of the policy things we're wrangling with and other things. So, we have to keep an eye on all of it, but within the beef industry, things look pretty good right now.
But namely, like you say, other things are out there, and one of those shadows that lurks is, in fact, where are we going to be with trade in 2018?
Yeah, that continues to hang over the market as a bit of a dark cloud. If nothing changes, it's been very robust. It looks good, but we are in the process of reconsidering our trade policy with respect to NAFTA, with respect to the Korean-U.S. free trade agreement. There's still some back and forth a bit with China in general trade terms, and so I think there's a fair amount of uncertainty that stems really from the political side of things that we just won't know until we know. If it doesn't change anything, then we're in pretty good shape, but certainly there's some threats there.
So absent a shock to the system, looking ahead to this trading week directly before us, probably steady trend, if not maybe a little better. What do you think?
I think that's very likely. We're probably going to be looking as we move through the month of February and on towards the end of the first quarter. We're going to be looking for a little bit of seasonal strength in general in both fed cattle and feeder cattle markets. I think we're talking about at least steady, if not maybe a little bit of building strength in these markets.
All right. We appreciate your input, Deryl, as always. Many thanks to you.
You're very welcome.
He is a livestock economist out of Oklahoma State University, and along with us regularly to talk the cattle market trends, Derrell Peel. You're listening to Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Tuned into the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. On this segment, we have very interesting new information for the beef cattle sector on the drivers of beef demand. Of course, that is key to profitability in this industry and has been even more so in recent years. One of the individuals who's been involved in this research is with us now, K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. He teamed up with colleague Ted Schroeder here at K-State and an agricultural economist now at Purdue University and a graduate of K-State, Jason Lusk, to look at the determinants of beef demand. And this, to point out, first of all, was a project sponsored by the Beef Checkoff, so producer investment in this, Glynn.
Yes, it was. So the Beef Board, which monitors how checkoff dollars are used, was behind this study. And some of our listeners that have been around for a while know that periodically the Beef Board encourages beef demand assessment studies. So this is not the first of its kind. It is different than some past ones, and we'll break that down a little bit in our session here today. But every once in a while, they ask the question, how strong is beef demand and what drives beef demand? And the core point of this project was to assess what are the drivers. So what is making beef demand come up, and when it falters, why is it going down? So we had a very intensive study assessing that.
And that is the difference between previous studies and this one, the intensity of it, the depth of it, right?
Yes, and how we went about it. So, as a backdrop, for those that read the full report once it's posted online, and it'll be freely available, is we actually have 4 different studies embedded in this study, and I'm not going to geek out and break all that down, but part of what we did was look at how price sensitivity, so how does behavior of buying beef change in response to prices? How has that changed over time? So there's no rule of thumb saying that consumers today are just as price sensitive as they were in the 80s, for example. So we have lots of economic models behind this, and one of the things we concluded was price sensitivity indeed is changing. Consumers are less sensitive to an increase in price than they used to be. Price still matters, but it doesn't matter, quote unquote, as much as it used to. Consumers also aren't as impacted by competing meat prices, so pork and chicken, as much as they used to, but they're impacted more by their consumer income levels. So when the general economic environment is good, like it is right now, so incomes are going up, wages are going up, and those kind of things, we've always known that's good for beef demand, but the marginal benefit of that for beef demand is actually growing. So there's a shift in the relative importance of consumer incomes relative to prices that's embedded in one of the analyses in this study.
Now, there are a number of findings within this, but that's one of the ones that really strikes one when they see it. This departure from price is an important factor. It's still important, but the weight it carries is considerably less.
Yes, and this is a bit outside the report, but I will take the liberty of kind of speculating on why that would be, is I think as we've had a growth in dual income households, growing pressure on meal prep time, ingredient time, those kind of things, we have less folks walking into the grocery store, studying the entire meat case, and being extra price sensitive to say walk in, and if a competing meat price is much cheaper, they pick it up because it's much cheaper. There's still some of that goes on, don't get me wrong, but in aggregate, I think we have more behavior that's walking into those stores getting a specific item for a specific purpose to go into a specific meal, which mutes some of that price sensitivity. In addition, there's other issues besides price that matter, which is core to our study as well. So topics like safety, sustainability, climate impacts, lots and lots of discussions about non-price factors of how we produce food, and in this case beef more narrowly, have risen. Right? We have a lot of media attention, medical journal attention to those kind of things. And a second analysis in this study was basically quantifying back to 1980 how much of those different discussions have been going on, and then to figure out what impact they've had on beef demand. And there's a lot of details there again in the report, but a couple nuggets just to encourage people is some things have changed both in magnitude as well as sign or directional impact on beef demand. We've known Atkins diet discussions are good for beef demand for some time. Most of our listeners might remember 04-05 was a really good period for beef demand, and that was the Atkins craze. Well, Atkins effects and discussions around that diet remain good and beneficial for beef demand, but they're not as influential as they used to be. So it's still positive, but it doesn't have the same oomph impact on beef demand as it used to. Another example that's intriguing is what's the impact of fat discussions. So the pros and cons of fat being in your diet as it relates to beef consumption. 10, 20 years ago, the tone in the medical journals and the general press was additional fat was bad for your diet. So more discussion was adverse for beef demand. Well, fast forward to more recently, we actually find it as a positive catalyst. So there's been some New York selling books on this topic. So the tone of the role of fat has changed. And I highlight that because even the same topic, in this case fat, can change over time in terms of its directional impact on beef demand. And I think that's important to monitor because you can't just use old rules of thumb and go forward because the impact of those things do change.
Well, Glynn, what about beef production practices themselves and perceptions? That was also one of your objectives in looking at media coverage, to put it that way, of the beef cattle sector.
Yeah, so some of the related topics, there's a lot of issues under the beef production umbrella, but we have issues like sustainability, animal welfare and well-being, those kind of aspects were tracked as well. And there are marginal benefits that are showing up on the beef demand front from that perspective, particularly sustainability. So as we have additional commentary in the media about sustainability, we're finding a positive impact on beef demand. It's hard for me to speculate on why that is. That's not really clear from this study, but rather just the directional conclusion is as we have more discussions around sustainability, we find that is beneficial for beef demand.
And you did look at changing consumer demographics over time too, you said.
Yeah, and the composition of U.S. households is changing over time. That's embedded in one of these assessments in the study as well. One of the things we note in our report is growth of the Hispanic as well as African American share of the U.S. population appears to be good for beef demand. That's worth noting going forward because both of those segments are expected to grow in the future. Other things that shook out that aren't surprising but rather just confirm kind of what we already suspected was higher income households, those that are fully employed and avoided recessionary impacts from the Great Recession back in 2009 tend to be more heavy state demanders. So we already kind of knew that, but it's good that shook out again in this report to confirm us of those kind of things. Gender differences, men tend to be a little bit more supportive of beef purchasing than females if there's a difference on that front on who's making the purchasing decisions. So the household composition effects, as you note, are outlined in that report as well.
Now, Glynn, to complement the findings on these beef demand determinants, you and your colleagues also forwarded several recommendations to the industry to bolster beef demand in the future.
Yeah, so there's several, and one of them is elevated importance on beef quality, even maybe at the expense you like of price. So there's going to be some things we can do to enhance taste, tenderness, freshness, those aspects. When I use the term beef quality, that's what I'm referring to. None of that's done for free. And I think there's signals from this report that if we can enhance beef quality in that context with some purposeful investments, even if it raises the beef price a little bit, that might be advantageous from beef demand. Where that comes from is we find things like taste and tenderness are very important in many, many studies, including ours. And yet at the same time, if price sensitivity is declining, add that up is where that comes from.
And one last thing, although you offered several other suggestions as to where this information might be of benefit to the beef sector, you advised that the beef cattle industry and beef production sector collaborate with competing meats, which is interesting.
Yes, and not everybody will agree with that recommendation, but where it's coming from is, remember I made the comment about the impact of competing meat prices is lower than it once was. That effectively means there's less substitution that's price sensitive than there once was. So that's one of the points behind that recommendation. The second part would be is there's a lot of issues embedded in this report and more generally throughout the entire meat protein complex that impact all species. So, for example, discussions around the effect of climate, new issues about whether we should have plant-based meat production and so forth. There's a lot of common discussions that impact the beef, the pork, the chicken, and other livestock-oriented meat protein industries that are kind of common to them. And none of them are free to combat and study and support research on and so forth. So if you couple the fact that there's less cross-competition and price sensitivity with a growing list of issues that impact the entire livestock space, that begs for more collaboration than maybe we've had in the past.
So all of that said, Glynn, how do you and your team hope this information will be used by the industry?
I hope point number one, and I sound like a broken record, is just recognize the importance of beef demand. So we outline that in the report and just remind everybody of that. Second would be is the answers to what is impacting beef demand change over time, and they're different for steak versus ground beef, and they're different for certain household types than other household types, and those kind of wrinkles in the story are getting more and more important. So homogeneous, across the board, black and white kind of statements, they mask a lot of the deeper part of the story about who's buying beef and who pays more for it. And hopefully studies like this help us kind of understand those nuggets. But I hope people take from the examples that are in this report the value of that understanding and how you act upon it. So this is beef checkoff oriented. There's a lot of investments that the checkoff does into promotion, into innovation on new products and so forth. Hopefully some of the specific findings from this will be used in making those checkoff allocation decisions.
Is there some place that one can go to review the entire document?
So it will eventually be on the Beef Board's webpage. The exact URL I'm not quite sure of, but we will cross-post to agmanager.info here at K-State, and anybody else is welcome to contact me, and I'll get them a copy.
Well, great work, and it is insightful information on what's driving beef demand, so utterly important to our producers out there, obviously, and we appreciate the time, Glynn. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
That's Glynn Tonsor, livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension. Once again, he and K-State livestock economist Ted Schroeder, as well as their peer at Purdue University, Jason Lusk, worked on this beef checkoff-funded and in-depth study assessing beef demand determinants. Again, it's posted on agmanager.info for your review, should you be so inclined. Producers, it's a good read. And this is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, and now for you the weekly Kansas 4-H segment. We've had occasion a number of times to talk of various Kansas 4-H events under the banner of the Space Tech program, and there's yet another such event coming up this spring, which we want to tell you all about right here. Along the line with us once again is Deryl Waldren, Research and Extension 4-H Specialist for K-State. He's based in Northwest Kansas. He oversees the administration of the Space Tech program. And before we outline this really neat event that's coming up in April, again, refresh us, Deryl, on the mission and purpose of this Space Tech program in the auspices of 4-H.
Well, in Kansas 4-H, Space Tech is what we've sort of put several different sub-projects underneath under that heading for the last, since the mid-'90s. And they include rocketry, robotics, computers, astronomy, and we've just added unmanned aerial systems, or commonly known as drones. So these 5 sub-project areas all fit under Space Tech in Kansas 4-H. So we periodically do trainings and have other experiences in this project area, and this is one of the latest.
Well, let's tell folks, the youngsters as well as adults out there, about this experience coming up in Hutchinson in early April. It's been dubbed the Alien Experience. What's it all about?
we are collaborating again with the Kansas Cosmosphere, which is located in Hutchinson. We've had a long-term relationship, and we've reactivated this relationship and partnership with them the last couple of years. And so this program is designed to be an adult-child experience, which means it could be a parent-child, could be a grandparent-child, or children, and we often will see a grandparent bring 3 or 4 grandkids and have a weekend outing with those kids to have that experience. So it's not a training, it's designed to have some hands-on fun activities inside the Cosmosphere, and it provides a unique experience for families.
And that could include, you say, youth between 9 to 18 years of age. So really it can be across the broad swath of 4-H'ers, can it not?
Right. So it's for 4-H'ers, parents, grandparents, extension staff, and volunteer 4-H leaders. So it can be a lot of different combinations.
Well, what takes place at this experience then?
Well, this one is built around aliens. So this is our third one that we've done the last year and a half. And so we've picked aliens this experience. So they're going to learn about what it is there life out there. So there's presentations on that. They'll divide into 3 groups and do rotations, and those rotations involve the imaginary Martian or Mars critters, and they'll go to another group, and have an alien solar system bracelets, and then they'll also learn about space observatories and other things. And they'll do some rotations, and they'll have a chance to see some program in the planetarium, as well as have a program in the Digital Dome Theater, which is their high-tech theater. And so we'll have lots of activities. It goes from about 24 hours. It starts at Friday on April 6th at 4 p.m., and it ends Saturday, April 7th at 4 p.m. So they'll actually stay in the Cosmosphere in sleeping bags or air mattresses, and they'll bring their all of those materials that they need, and they'll have 3 meals there and breaks and all the educational sessions. And so it's a nice little 24-hour package, and we let them go at 4 on Saturday. And
a great family event, as you're outlining here. This is guided by the personnel at the Kansas Cosmosphere, who are obviously well-versed in all of this, right, Deryl?
Yes, we have a teacher from Concordia. She comes down and does these weekend special camps, as we're kind of called, but we call it the Alien Experience.
Very well. So this is taking place again April the 6th and the 7th. Should young people start lining up and registering this early?
They should, because we are capping it at 60 people, because we want it to be small enough to make it hands-on and fun and experiential, and not, because we can't really provide that for 100 people, because it just dividing into 3 groups, they're just too big. So we're going to cap it at around 60, and so, yeah, there is and we can have a waiting list, but that doesn't make people happy. And there'll be future ones, but for this particular alien experience, it's coming up pretty quick. Cost is $110, and that's $110 for every person attending. So it doesn't matter if you're a child or an adult, a grandparent, parent, volunteer leader, extension staff. We all have to pay $110 to cover the cost.
But that does include the meals and all the contingencies. So.
Yep, all the meals, the breaks, the educational sessions, and the whole package. So
to register, this can be handled online?
Yes, we're going to use the CVent registration system that Kansas 4-H Youth Development uses, and the easiest way to find it is to go to the Kansas 4-H homepage, which is www.kansas4-h.org, and that's on the homepage, and on the upper left you'll see Register for Events, and click on that, and you'll see the Alien Experience, and click on there, and you can register.
Very good. Again, kansas4h.org is where to register or to find out more about this alien experience under the 4-H Space Tech program, taking place Friday and Saturday, the 6th and the 7th of April at the Kansas Cosmosphere in Hutchinson. And this is but one of what are expected to be a number of space tech experiences through the calendar year 2018, Deryl, correct?
Yes, we hope to have at least 2 this year, and we're still formulating plans for the next one. And this is done by the Kansas Space Tech 4-H Space Tech Action Team, and we are always looking for members for that. So if you've got a keen interest in the Space Tech project area, they should give me a call, Deryl Waldren, at 785-462-6281, and I'd be happy to answer questions on that or the alien experience.
Very good. Deryl is at 785-462-6281 or email him at dwaldren@ksu.edu. Best of luck with this, Deryl. Great idea, and looking forward to it. Thanks for a brief preview of this alien experience coming up in Hutchinson in the spring.
Thanks, Eric. Nice talking with you.
He is Deryl Waldren, Research and Extension 4-H Specialist for K-State. He is based out of Northwest Kansas. All of the details, as always, again, at kansas4h.org. And that is this week's 4-H segment for you. Once again, our time is away for today. As we go, we'd invite you once more to check out our podcast of each of our day's broadcasts. Subscribing to that is quite easy. Go to ksre.ksu.edu/news. You'll find the Radio Network tab to the left side of that page. Click on that, and then on the Agriculture Today link to follow. And the subscription instructions are right there. ksre.ksu.edu/news. Meantime, thanks for tuning in today, and please rejoin us here tomorrow. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.